Okay, I think we can start. Going to start and say a good evening to everyone and welcome to this SAMA webinar, which touches on an extremely important and relevant topic, healthy water in time of the pandemic. This webinar is indeed very special, and it is hosted in partnership with the Global Circle of Businesswomen. Yes, SAMA does have a group to which we belong for the females, and this is the Global Circle of Businesswomen. So if you are a SAMA member, you automatically, and if you're a female, be part of the Global Circle of Businesswomen. And it's this water initiative is very close to my heart. Throughout our series of popular webinars that we had before, we touched on several critical aspects of the pandemic, including those related to the spread and treatment of the pandemic, as well as all issues relating to the vaccines. For me, it is a great honor to again host this webinar, which is open to all members and non-members of SAMA. I'm pleased that tonight we have a preeminent guest speaker who are going to speak to us on the topic of healthy water, which is a critical component of dealing effectively with COVID-19. And yes, she's not a doctor, but she's a doctor in her own way. And she's going to teach us some stuff. And we are hoping from SAMA's side that each and every one of you here will become a champion in your urban area or rural area or any other area where you are practicing, that we can start with this initiative. But I won't say more about this because Dr. Michelle Kruger will tell us more about this. But before we start, I want to please urge those of you who aren't yet SAMA members to please visit our website or contact us to find out more about the benefits of joining this important association and brother and sisterhood of family practitioners and specialists out there. So before again, I would like to ask all participants to mute their microphones as to avoid any interference with the speakers. Please do not raise your hand or make use of the chat, as we are unable to respond to questions raised during these presentations. All questions can be asked afterwards. This process will be moderated by Ms. Shelley McGee from our Knowledge Management Department. Now, this is the big part that come up here. Speaking to us tonight is, as I've already said, Dr. Michelle Kruger, and she looks beautiful tonight. She's an exceptional individual who holds a doctorate in civil engineering and someone who has been involved in water and wastewater projects since 2004. Among her many achievements, Dr. Kruger has served as a lead inspector on the panel of Department of Water and Sanitation's Blue Drop, Green Drop initiative. She's the author of the book, The Development of Women and Young Professionals in STEM careers. So we know STEM as something else, but she will explain to us what STEM is, and is conducting research in the field of women in engineering for the Postgraduate School of Engineering Management at the University of Johannesburg. In addition, this is not finished yet, Dr. Kruger also holds several local and international posts, including International Mentor and Trainer at the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, FIDIC. She's also chair of the FIDIC Diversity and Inclusion team. She's a member of the advisory board of the African Utility Week. She's a member of the Water Institute of Southern Africa and past board member of Consulting Engineers South Africa. From this abbreviated resume, not a doctor, but another doctor, it is quite clear that Dr. Kruger is eminently qualified to address us on the issue of healthy water in the times of pandemic. And I'm delighted to have her here with us tonight. And Dr. Kruger, please tell us how we can assist from SAMA's side with a nice project going forward, making drinking water much better. And I think that a lot of my colleagues here do think that we understand water, but with the previous engagement I had with you, even me learned from water from you. So without any to do, Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angelique Gutsia. I really appreciate this opportunity from SAMA, and thank you so much also for the Circle of Global Businesswomen. We are very excited to be part of this interaction with you. For me, I'm extremely passionate about water and wastewater, and you'll see when I do my presentation, this also comes across, because I think ultimately it's a fascinating field to be part of, and I'm just sharing my screen now. And it's so extremely interesting, and the way it interacts with you as doctors. I just want to also start off to say thank you so much for everything that you as medical doctors are doing in time of a pandemic as well. So we as civilians are super appreciative of this as well. I just want to apologize. There might be a slight sound effect because I've got a fan on because I'm in a bit of a hot box study. So I apologize for that. So as you've heard, I'm Dr. Michelle Kruger, and I'm a past chair of the Circle of Businesswomen, now on the advisory board. And I'm currently also advisor to the Minister of Water and Sanitation, the Honourable Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, also working very hard behind the scenes to try and do everything that we can to improve the lives of people in the communities. So as you might have seen in the invitation, we're going to talk about water and wastewater treatment processes. This I can talk about all day, so apologies if I carry on about that. And its association with waterborne diseases and COVID as well, of course. And then the COVID-19 wastewater tracing program. And something you might have heard the president mention in the State of the Nation address is the blue drop and green drop regulation programs. So as you can see there, the water treatment process, in my mind, is a very exciting one, right? So it's what I do, it's what I design, it's what we're getting to the ground, and ultimately the lives we change with access to potable, and that means drinking water treatment. For me, it means so much. And the irony is the processes that that I'll show you today in both in water and wastewater are the same processes since the dawn of time that happens naturally in the water courses as well. So the first thing we do is take water from whatever water source there is, such as a dam, a river, or whatever is available. And the next step is we do coagulation. Now, coagulation is just a fancy word to say, let's make the sediment heavy. So the irony is it's a chemical, and there are many of the chemicals, and what we typically do is we do a jar test to see what chemical and at what dosage works best for this raw water. And what it does is it makes the sediments or sand particles touch each other, stick together, get snotty and stick together, and then make it gravitate out, right? And you want that to be as efficient as possible. And now what would typically happen after this, it would either happen inline in the piping process if it's a smaller treatment plant, or we would actually have flocculation channels that makes the water, it's a channel that goes, try and get the particles to mash together to get them to be heavy and fall out. So up to now, all we've done is just added a little chemical. Chance of overdosing, not really big. Chance of having health effect, not really big, because in the volume of water that passes through, it's a very small volume of water. Okay, you'll see there's a dot that says DAF and there's a dot that says ozone and GAC. GAC, I'll approach that now. Typically, the next step in sedimentation in a small water treatment plant, this is where now that we've made them heavy, they fall out, the particles fall by gravitation, and you'll see there it goes to a recovery plant, and I'll address that now. The next step, a lot of us know about this, is filtration. Literally, we let the water by gravity flow through media particles. So these media particles can be a one-dimensional type of particle, such as river sand. And generally, what we just would like to see as engineers is that the uniformity coefficient, or what in layman's terms, the size of the particle be such a manner that when you do backwashing, in other words, you reverse the flow of water to clean the top snotty layer of the filter, that you don't wash out all your fine particles. So it needs to be a bit uniform, that gravity works and you keep most of your particles in your basin. So you'll see there's a line going as well from filtration to recovery. And this is just in South Africa, we try to keep in our drought conditions as much of the water contained and recycling it into the system. So when we do sedimentation and we do filtration, the water recovery that we get from there, it goes back into the system, and ultimately you'll just have a type of sludge, a snotty type of sediment, which will go into a sedimentation dam, and every couple of years we'll just remove that as well. So from there, you'll see we say disinfection. So this is where you have the huge exclamation marks, and this is one of the most important parts of water treatment. So even if you mess up everything up to now, this is the one part that you should not mess up. And there are various forms of disinfection in South Africa. You know, most of all in the rural areas, they even use something as normal as HTH. In the larger treatment plants, we use chlorine gas. So obviously it has its risks as well. But ultimately, what we need to make sure is that we take care of all the nasties, as you well know. So you'll see there's a brown dot, and I call it DAF. So when we have eutrophic water, and eutrophic water I mean by it's green, full of algae like Hartbeespoort Dam, this is where it's no longer sufficient just to use these processes. Now we have algae and algal toxins. And now I'm going to get really sentimental as well, but I think it's really testament to how amazing microorganisms are. So the algae in the water, when you have your intake situation, the algae, you have your physical algae and the toxins. But what's really interesting about the algae is when you have an intake tower in a dam, the algae moves up and down during the day. So you have to have certain intake points as the algae moves up and down. Isn't that amazing? That's so cute. So we make sure that we have an idea of where the clearest water is that we can take in. And ultimately through DAF, which is dissolved air flotation, algae is not heavy enough to gravitate in the sedimentation. And what we literally do is we use dissolved air to float up the algae. That's amazing. And what we do is whenever, say on a timer or on an experience basis, we literally just lift the water level and float the algae off the top surface of that unit. And ultimately that can also go into the recovery plant. What we also then do, and typically it depends on if you're working on an existing plant or not, if you have these algal toxins or endocrine disruptors, as you guys know them as well, something that is a bit more difficult to take out of the water, we have ozone and GAC, or sometimes it depends on the pricing. And historically, ozone and GAC was the least expensive, but now chlorine dioxide is getting less expensive as well, is to make sure that we take out the nasties. So in layman's term, with ozone, we chop them up, and with granular activated carbon, we adsorb those nasties out of the system. And ultimately, as you see there, it goes into storage. And here we have huge exclamation marks as well. And this is when we're talking about times of a pandemic. This is where things get really important, that we keep the disinfection going. And in rural areas, especially, this is where you have your water tankers or your Jojo tanks where people come collect water for COVID means. Or also what happens is you might have standpipes or community pipes, community taps, right? Okay. So this is where things can go wrong, where already you can see it's quite a sensitive system. If anything goes wrong, fair enough, we can make it work, but the disinfection is the one part we can't let go. But as you well know, that when it comes to distribution, anything can happen to make things go wrong. And it can be either breakages in the potable distribution system, breakages in the wastewater collection system, cross-contamination. You could, for example, have the chlorine that you dosed might not reach all the way to the far end of the system. And then ultimately, if you're in a standpipe or community pipe, what we've noticed, and this is the part where we hugely want to interact with you as doctors for community awareness, is a lot can go wrong between the community members collecting water from a JoJo tank, a water tanker, a standpipe, and going into their houses. Okay, so oftentimes people are not aware that they're receiving the water, potable or drinkable, but do their own efforts, they are not ensuring that disinfection. I do admit and I do realize we do have challenges on the ground in communities where municipalities have challenges ensuring that the infrastructure is maintained. And that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But here, where we can affect change is through yourselves on the ground with communities and champions to say, what can we do to ensure our water remains potable and that we have enough of the water to ensure that we have COVID prevention protocols. Okay. So the next step that I wanted to share with you. So keep in mind, Dr. Angelique asked me if I can share with you the effects of non-treatment. So there you'll see the disinfection is the big one, things that can go wrong, and I'll speak more to that. But due to the fact that the president spoke about the blue drop and green drop during the SONA, I would like to take a bit more time for blue drop and green drop and hopefully have another webinar to describe to you more about the water effluent, wastewater effluent, and we'll get there. So what you can be very proud of in South Africa is we have an internationally accredited system whereby we have limits to the associated risk for domestic water. And you may have known this as SABS, but now known as the South African National Standards. And I'm very proud of the fact that we are world-class in the limits that we set. And the South African National Standards sets 3 limits to the water. So it speaks about health risks, aesthetic risks, and operational risks. So obviously health risks, this is the thing that you as doctors see prominently. So it causes acute and health risks health problems, sorry. The next one is aesthetic. The parameters falling outside these are about making sure that when you drink a glass of water, it looks good and it smells good, right? And then the operational risk, these are operational procedures that might ensure that you're not reaching water quality standards. I'm going to get into more detail about that now. So here you have it. The microbiological determinants are the most important. And this is where you as doctors will see most prominently diarrhea, right? E. coli or fecal coliforms. What's less prominent is Cryptosporidium and Giardia. We found more in America that seems to be an issue, but up until now, not as prominent in South Africa. If there are outbreaks, we have a look at that, but typically our disinfection systems can take care of that. Again, total coliforms to do with disinfection and heterotrophic play counts, you will be aware of that. And again, that's operational. Now, once we dose chlorine, again, now the next challenge is we don't want to dose too much chlorine because that has health effects as well. So your free chlorine, your monochloramine, and so on. So then again, coming back to your aesthetic, you'll see the color, conductivity, dissolved solids. Again, you don't want it to be salty and those type of things. Turbidity, we always try and reach a turbidity of 1. And what's really amazing, and I've been on hundreds of water and wastewater treatment plants all over South Africa, it's been amazing to see how you'll see these dams in the Eastern Cape, and the dams are so clear that you struggle to get turbidity. In other words, the dams are so clear, when you dose coagulants, there's nothing to settle. It's so clear, it's so beautiful. So sometimes we don't even need sedimentation. So there's some good news. I'm a spreader of good news. And you'll see, obviously, pH very important. And then when you pick things up like, obviously, E. coli is a marker, but nitrates, nitrites, ammonia, then you're starting to realize, okay, we're hitting some wastewater effluent. You might recall a fluoride program historically, risks around that. I don't want to spend too much time around this, but you can see that the SANS 241 is out to protect us as consumers. And ultimately, it even covers everything that might be an issue around mining effluent and all these things as well. I have to apologize again for the wind. It's a bit hot in here. So here's my personal favorite, and it's wastewater. And the reason I say that is it's a system that we are able to emulate that, again, happens naturally in nature, right? So we'll have domestic and industrial wastewater coming in. And very, very interesting is when we get wastewater, without getting very gross, we all have expectations of what's in the wastewater, right? So interesting enough, the things we find most in wastewater are rags and newspapers. And I've even seen microwaves and whole cows coming down in the wastewater treatment plants. So it's amazing surprises that you get, right? So when we do the screening, what we're doing is we are protecting the downstream mechanical equipment. What's very interesting, and especially people in informal settlements, they use often sand to wash their pots, right? And we'll have, for example, during stormwater events, a lot of sediment coming down into the system. So we have to remove that sand, and we can do it either manually or through automated systems. Obviously, the more automation, the more there is chances of having maintenance problems. And ultimately, the screenings, which is the rags and newspapers and grit, can go into landfills. But there are the legislation for changing that into, sorry, I'm just going to see if I can minimize this wind for you, is to see what type of toxicities are on there, and to make sure, aren't we dumping hazardous substances? So that's still ongoing, the legislation around that. The next one, number 2, you'll see are primary clarifiers. These are not on small treatment plants. And the reason for that is you'll see that goes to digesters, and I'll come to digesters again later. But then number 3, oh, and it's so amazing. I love this part of a treatment plant. And this is where the magic happens, are the bioreactors, right? But you'll also see the exclamation marks here. This is where things can go beautifully right or horribly wrong. Okay. You'll see that there are bubbles there, so that means we include aeration, and you'll see there are mixes there, which means we're keeping the bugs in suspension. And what we need to remove are 3 things in the bioreactor: carbon, ammonia, and phosphate. And historically, in the old days, think about the 1800s, the only thing that we're trying to do is just a bit of sedimentation. Then come the 1930s in South Africa, and you'll see, especially in the Johannesburg area, we were very prevalent about trying to remove the carbon, but also to oxidize the ammonia. But obviously, when you oxidize ammonia, what you're going to get, nitrates and nitrites. And historically, it wasn't even a marker that we measured. So then obviously that came into play. And what do? Now that you have nitrates and nitrites, what we do, and you'll see there, number 4, secondary clarifiers, we recycle that, return activated sludge. We return the nitrates into the system. In the area that you see, there's a mixer. And very important here, You must not have any aeration or back mixing of the air, because what the bugs see, and this is a very simplified way of saying it, is the bugs have now opportunity to be stressed, and you have denitrification in the system. It's a bit more complicated than I'm saying, but not important for what we're discussing here. So now the great thing is now you've removed carbon, you've removed ammonia. The denitrification caused the nitrates and nitrites to go into nitrogen gas up in the air, and you've removed those two things. And keep in mind that the carbon, it's literally, if you think about it, when we eat McDonald's, that's also just carbon. And what the weird thing is, just like those bugs, we also need air to eat. How cool is that? And when you introduce the air, you take care of the carbon, right? There are, however, limits to how much carbon and ammonia can remove. And therefore, the incoming raw water profile is so important when we design water and wastewater treatment works. And this is where I'm always so sorry for my fellow engineers, is often when we design these treatment plants, we get a raw water profile that looks like X, but in future it's going to change to Y or Z, or whatever the case may be, and this plant has to adapt to that. So this is where I have the beautiful star that you see there. And this is where we have processes all around the world that are being used. Now, there are multiple ways to remove what I've just prescribed to you, and the last one, phosphate, is included in here. And all around the world, the UCT process, University of Cape Town process, and Joburg process, which is from Joburg Water, is used all around the world. So from the 70s, we've been on the forefront of wastewater treatment process, something to be extremely proud about as a South African. Now, when we're trying to remove phosphate, you'll preferably have another basin preceding that one that shows the mixer. I'm not going to get into the detail, but ultimately we stress the bugs to release phosphate and stress them again to take up phosphate. Just like a lady who's been on a diet and sees chocolates, we use the same method in wastewater treatment. Isn't that fantastic? And then ultimately, if we can't stress the bugs enough to take up enough phosphate, what we have there is the next dot that you'll see there is ferric chloride. So what we can do is through metal addition, we can enforce sedimentation of the phosphate or orthophosphate, and that goes out in the secondary clarifiers. Now you'll see item number 5, we talk about UV disinfection. In South Africa, we don't use UV disinfection so much. If we do, it's through large maturation dams where the sun provides the UV to disinfect the dams. But typically we use chlorine in the form of chlorine gas, or in the really small plants, we use even HDH, those type of things. And ultimately the discharge to the river, that's the most important. We shouldn't overdose the chlorine or underdose the chlorine, but you can see, because this is a electric mechanical system that you're seeing in front of you, if the power is out or you're not doing proper operation and maintenance, you'll get raw sewage going into your river. And again, I just want to point out, you can see the system is very, very complicated, more than water treatment. And this is where I implore everybody, when we're doing our awareness campaigns, it costs twice as much money to treat wastewater than it does to treat water. That's a shocking fact. I'm sure most people don't know that, but now you can see why. So now that we have sludge from the primary clarifiers and from the secondary clarifiers, so you'll see from the secondary clarifiers, we'll take the sludge, and this is such a sad fact of life. Some of them get to go back into the bioreactors to go make babies. The rest of them go to the gravity belt to die. so ultimately that's a horrific choice in, well, not for them a choice in life, but those are the two options. And what we do then is, through a gravity belt thickener, we literally squeeze the water out of the system just to ensure that the volume of sludge we have to treat is a bit less. And depending if we do have a primary clarifier or not, we then have digesters. If we do have primary clarifiers, we must have a digester because that sludge is unstable. If we have bioreactors with a longer time that it spends in the bioreactor, normally that stabilizes the sludge and we don't necessarily have to have a digester. From there, it could go straight to the lagoons. And what that means is just, again, gravity settling the sludge to the bottom. We can use that for composting, and the supernatant or top water goes back into the system. So you would have heard a lot about waste to energy. And this is where the digesters come into play. So the digesters are a system whereby you can remove the calories or make sure that you generate biogas, and that can either go into the boilers to heat the digester to improve the rate of digestion, or that can go into generators. In South Africa, we only have 1 or 2 of those where we generate electricity. If we don't do either of those things, we are supposed to flare the gas off to make sure we're not sending that into the atmosphere. So you can see a lot of sensitive points. Number 1, sensitive, the bioreactors, the disinfection, and if things go really wrong, you don't want the sludge to go back into the river system as well. Okay, I hope you find this interesting. I love it, of course. Now, when you want to build a wastewater treatment plant, you have to apply to the Department of Water and Sanitation for a water use license, and they will specifically set a set of limits for you. But if that's not the case, if you're not that large a volume of effluent discharging, then they'll give you either special general limits, or if you're discharging into the vol or sensitive catchment, they'll give you special limits. Now, don't worry about the detail of this, but I just want to point out again, we have world-class standards, and I've done some work around Africa, and I can tell you our limits are much more stringent than anywhere else in Africa, and even some areas of Europe and so on. So again, limits to your pH, and again, it speaks about possible mining activities that could have influenced your wastewater. Again, what we want is our rivers to maintain their pristine aspect and not to be polluted by the effluent of wastewater and become even more eutrophic. Now we're coming to waterborne diseases, right? Now we have all of those, and I know not all of them can be affected by water and wastewater treatment, like malaria and so on and so on. But the point that we're trying to make is that by the time it gets to you, you might see diarrhea, vomiting as the most common symptoms. But the other symptoms can include skin diseases, ear, respiratory, or eye problems. And we'll do more about that in our next webinar. But the ultimate solution to that and the prevention during COVID-19 is clean, disinfected water. So you'll see in both the water and wastewater treatment processes, we have a huge red flag there: disinfection, disinfection, disinfection. Okay. So what can affect clean, disinfected water? We have our infrastructure, like I've just shown you, but keeping in mind that the collection and the distribution systems can be affected as well. We have water scarcity. As you all know, once we have drought and available water is affected, then that can affect the water quality as well. Sanitation. This is a very important one, which in future programs will work a lot with you to make awareness out there, because for example, the use of ventilated pit latrines or long drops can often affect the water quality. If there's a borehole, for example, if the long drop is too close to the borehole water, and obviously this can hugely affect people's health if they're not aware if it's downstream or even part of the water course underneath the ground. And for me, a passion that something I'm passionate about is contamination pathways. And I'm going to give you a bit of detail here. One of the examples we found on the ground is, for example, this poor lady carrying a huge bucket of water. She's old. This is such a hectic endeavor for her. And by the time she gets home, she plonks it down. She's exhausted, only to find the dogs drinking her tub, or and the tub wasn't clean, or for example, making sure that the hands are washed when people use the water from the tubs. And we'll speak a bit more about that later, how that can be improved. But ultimately, when you have standing water, the disinfection can only go so fast for a limited amount of time, and then we have a disinfection problem again. And then something that I'm actually a proponent for is recycling. So you'll find if I have to carry that heavy bucket for so far, I'm just going to make sure that every drop goes as far as I can. Grey water recycling, all of these things. But again, that's opportunity for cross-contamination. Ultimately, as a rule, when we're looking at the prevention of waterborne diseases and COVID-19, it's all about disinfection. So as it says, the bleach, hypochlorite, or chlorine should be used for disinfection. If we have boiling, and sometimes you have boiler alerts in municipalities as well, UV disinfection, making sure that disinfection takes place. But it says there as well that sometimes it's not the disinfection that's the problem, it's where everybody comes together to collect their water. Sometimes you have then issues around COVID infection as well. So this comes from the WRC. And again, when we're moving to the COVID tracing wastewater program, I just want to give credit to the WRC as well. I can get through the SAMA, I can give you some contact details from Jay for the WRC, and I'll speak to more detail about that. So the tracing program started a while ago, as you might have heard from the news agency. So phase 1 is to look at proof of concept. Can we do this? Can we trace COVID in wastewater? And obviously, as you might have heard from the news agencies, yes, we can. Not just here, but all around the world. And the important thing is to establish the sampling protocols and the sampling analysis and the sampling profile and the risk of infection at wastewater, as you can see there. So this was under the WRC, Water Research Commission, sorry, mustn't use acronyms. And then from there, the next step is pilot scale monitoring. And to a degree, this was actually quite successful, especially in the city of Cape Town. The profiling that they found there was very successful. Ekurhuleni, if I remember correctly. And then the establishing of the partnerships to see how can we take it national. So WRC was trying to work with partners to see how that can be done. The fantastic thing is we can do this. We can trace the prevalence of COVID, but there are problems, and you'll see this in the next slide. And this came out with phase 3 of the program. So keep in mind, this was the status quo in July last year. And the WRC indicated to me that one of the biggest problems in moving into phase 3 is to be able to have a map all across South Africa. And this is where you as doctors might be able to help to say, if the municipality cannot afford a tracing program, because you'll recall we have so many things to monitor for water and wastewater, each of those tests costs money. If there's any way we can help in this tracing program through private funding, whatever the case may be, at least it can create a map, a hotspot map of wastewater, COVID in wastewater. But you can see it's a long-term program. So ultimately, where are we now with the tracing program? We have a need for research to support it. Again, where are we doing the sampling site? One of the things initially we didn't pick up are non-sewage sites. For example, long drops, ventilated pit latrines. We're not even picking up those in the rural areas. Should we take grab or composite samples, storage and preservation of the samples, the frequency of sampling? Because for yourselves as doctors, obviously, it's all about having timeous information. What is the prevalence of COVID today, now, right now, in which area? And then the consensus, and you remember the treatment process I showed you. Should we be going for raw water, which is obviously quite dilute, or should we be going for primary sludge? Further, we discussed the methods. data analysis, the consensus of basic assumptions, so on, to understand the correlation observed versus the concentrations, and so on, so on. So what is the data telling us? And again, once we have the data, how do we do the data management, reporting and communication? How do we manage to communicate to the relevant authorities? And I want to compliment yourselves here with a COVID testing. It's been very relevant, and all the news sites every day, everybody knows how many people has contracted COVID, and how do we do a similar exercise when we do it in wastewater treatment, keeping in mind that there might not be a direct correlation between the COVID testing that you are aware of versus it in wastewater, because obviously less people are actually testing for COVID outright. And how do we maximize that data? What other information? So what was interesting from the Cape Town study is they picked up quite interesting reporting on drug use. So again, you don't really want to intrude on people's privacy and it go into a criminal element, but it was very interesting to see where you would pick up drug use as well. But ultimately, for the non-sewage sanitation, when we didn't have anything yet, we need to have a design of a surveillance program, keeping in mind it's not that easy to reach these long drops or pit latrines, and very onerous compared to your sewage sanitation. And now something that I'm very excited about to present to you, and again, apologies that I'm not going in more detail with the treatment, but we can have a follow-up webinar, is the presentation of blue drop and green drop, the comeback of that by the president during the State of the Nation address. So oftentimes people think a blue drop or green drop status means the water is safe to drink or the wastewater treatment plant is working. And I'm here to tell you it was so much more than that. And I'm very honored to say I was part of the program since 2009 to about 2014 when it fizzled out. And there's many reasons why I did that. But ultimately, that's not the news. The news, and the good news is we're going back there and we're going to restart the program again. And what it was designed to serve as a stimulus for change, a catalyst to establish motivation and leadership in the water sector, right? Because it doesn't help for me to be a process controller and me being gung-ho and saying, I can do this, but my management and the budget does not support me. And can I just say, after being on hundreds of water and wastewater treatment plants, I just will have the best things to say about the people on the sites, humble people who just want to do their jobs and they really know what they're doing. You must see these people. When you ask them how much coagulant are you dosing, they're like, I've been here for years, I know exactly how much to dose. And when you check it, it is exactly right. These people have experience, and it's so inspiring to see when they do their jobs and the sites are clean, and it's, yeah, I must just say, I love those people. So ultimately, it's also to include the leadership, the management, a paradigm shift by which water and wastewater operations, management, and regulation, so the three are approached together, and it promotes incentive-based regulation. In other words, carrot, not the stick. The reason for this is the department realized that if we sue a municipality, it can take up to 8 to 10 years to get a response from the municipality. And that doesn't even mean that the effluent is going to improve, for example, at a wastewater treatment plant, as you might have seen yourself on the news. But at least if we say, let's incentivize these people. Let's say, if you get a blue drop and a green drop, you're excellent. And at the height of this program, some of these blue and green drop scores were even connected to the bonuses of municipal managers. This is how powerful this program was. And I just want to add to say, it even won an American award for its inventiveness. So how amazing is that? It set the bar around the world with no equivalent that we knew of at the time. So the criteria focuses on effective management. Instead of just looking at what does the effluent quality or the final water quality look like. Now, I wanted to show to you, and this is just an example, don't worry about the detail. And of course, this is not going to embarrass me. Obviously, that's what IT is for, to embarrass us. Don't worry about all the wordy words. I wanted to show you that if a municipality or metro achieved a blue drop, it didn't mean that the water is good to drink. So your blue drop percentage is made up of all of these things. So water safety planning, making sure the water, you know where your resource is coming from, you know what all the risks are around your water, your risk assessment, monitoring program. Are you monitoring every place you should? Are you monitoring often enough? Are you registering any incidents like boil alerts and so on? That only counts for 35%. There you can see when we talk about process management and control, drinking water quality verification. Very important, are they using an accredited lab? You can see there micro counts 50% of this mark. This is, again, disinfection, disinfection, disinfection. And the aesthetic is only a bonus. And what that means is if I make sure that my aesthetic is good, I get a bonus. And what I think you guys will love is to see if there's a difference between the data that I post to the Department of Water and Sanitation and what the lab actually gives. In other words, am I lying about my water quality? That provides a penalty. If I don't provide enough data, and sometimes we had the municipalities, if they had a bad month, they didn't post their data. You have to post every time. And then notification of failure. We even said you can lose your blue drop by notification of a failure. Then further, you see the management commitment, publication of your performance, service level agreement between the water service authorities, water service providers, submission of your data. Are you doing it regularly as you should? And then you see some bonuses there, performance agreements and procurement processes. We all know this is an issue. And again, a penalty again if you're not doing proper data submission. There's even an act that's criminal if you're lying about your data, quality of your water. Now coming through to asset management. You know, you're doing your annual process audit, and what that is, for example, an engineer like myself going on site, doing an audit on site to say exactly what's going right, what's going wrong, and how it could be improved. Your asset register, you see how progressive the blue drop actually is. Your O&M manual, do you have one? What's the quality? And most importantly is what's your O&M budget and your expenditure? Ultimately, you also want to see what is the design size of your plant versus what it's receiving. Because obviously, if your plant is close to its capacity, you should be already applying for funding or trying to find funding to expand your plant. Then when we're looking at the no drop, you'll see there water use efficiency and water loss management. You all would have heard that sometimes up to 40 or 50% of water is being lost. Now you remember the treatment process. We are paying a raw water tariff to the department to extract raw water out of the dam or the river. We're paying for all those treatment processes. We're paying for all the electricity and chemicals and staff and maintenance. And now we're losing 40 to 50% of it in the network. That's such a waste. So it's very important to the department that we work on maintaining the integrity of our networks. And you'll see that the blue drop only accounts for 97%, and your no drop or water conservation demand management counts for 3%. I personally think it should be more, but let's see. And I just want to mention this is how it was historically. The new requirements for blue drop will probably come out soon. But as you can see, people's perception around, oh, I can drink the water if the blue drop criteria are there, it's so much more than that. And we can be proud of that. We got an American award for that. And now moving over to wastewater, similar. I'm not going to go through all those processes again, but here you can see wastewater quality compliance is but only 35%. So if my effluent is clear, it doesn't mean that I have management accountability, the local bylaws, for example, industries dumping their wastewater. Am I charging them risk abatement? So that is the equivalent of the wastewater water safety plan, wastewater risk abatement plan. If everything goes wrong, what is the recourse? What is my incident protocols? You can see asset management counts for quite a lot there. So this is the exciting thing about the fact that the president said the blue drop and green drop programs are coming back. So much to be excited about. And the exciting thing about green drop as well is it's got a cumulative risk rating. And what they were trying to do here is if you have a small plant in the Eastern Cape, and you have very bad effluent or very good effluent versus a massive plant in Gauteng, like in Tshwane, for example, dumping towards Hartbeespoort Dam, the effect on the water resource is obviously much more. So that we're trying to make sure that if there is a huge problem, it immediately jumps out to the authorities to look at, is the wastewater treatment plant over its design capacity, number of non-compliant strains in its effluent, and of course the technical skills required. So in conclusion, when we look at water and wastewater treatment processes and waterborne diseases, we have in South Africa a lot to be proud of. We had world-class processes, but as we all know, there are challenges with capacity, budgets, local municipalities, nothing new that I can tell you that's new. We have contamination pathways we need to be aware of. Ultimately, fighting waterborne diseases and COVID-19 relies on access to clean, disinfected sources. For COVID-19, the wastewater tracing program means we have phase 1 and 2 that looks promising, but we need support for national implementation. And I think we can talk about this. This can be an open debate during the Q&A. Have we missed a wave? Are we on our way to the third wave? What does the data mean? But most important, most exciting, and most to be celebrated, you can see the requirements for blue and green drop compliance. Incentive-based regulation can have a massive effect on improving all the aspects we just spoke about, water and wastewater treatment, and water qualities, ultimately now announced by the president, and we can be very proud of that. And looking ahead regarding the partnership between the Circle of Global Businesswomen and SAMA, myself as well, what we're looking to do is to review the water quality data and do a survey for yourself to identify targeted areas, as Dr. Kutsi was saying, to look at pilot programs, to get local champions, to ensure that we create material for awareness campaigns. There's so much we can do on the ground, working with communities to make councillors aware that can speak back to council, that can speak back to municipalities, to ensure that the budgets for operation and maintenance are spent the way they're supposed to be. We can even do a survey used by doctors with community members. Should resources allow that, we can do it similar to what is happening now with COVID tracing, that we can rely on get reliable data for hotspots if there are issues with water and sanitation and the water qualities. Ultimately, we're looking at ensuring that we can support communities for safer transport of water. And some of you might know about the HIPAA roller. This is just one opportunity, but it's a mission for people to be carrying water, to have community standpipes. In South Africa, we've already come a long way from 1994, but we do have a growing community, and as fast as we are trying to roll out infrastructure, the communities are growing, and then we had a pandemic as well. So if we can create an opportunity to have something like a HIPAA roller, which is a container that's rolled on the ground, not carried on the head, that's clean, uncontaminated, and closed off so that it can't be cross-contaminated, and provide that for the communities, that would be great. So that's the end of my spiel. I hope you experienced the passion that I have for water and wastewater treatment, and excited as I am about it. And hopefully we can work together in the future to improve the situation. Thank you, Dr. Angelique.
Hi, Michelle. I think Dr. Angelique has had to drop off. So thank you very much for that. It's quite amazing when you see all the details and all the processes that go into water treatment, that we actually land up at any stage with good quality water coming through the systems. So we've had a couple of questions. I see Dr. Farida has raised a hand. Can I just ask you please to put your question in the Q&A section and we'll try to get to it. The first question that came up, Dr. Kruger, was to do with having JoJo tanks at home. So the question that came through is, how does one ensure that that water is safe to drink if the main water supply is interrupted?
So the first question I'll ask is, what would be the reason for you to use that water? And as you stated, if your water supply is compromised, ultimately what would be best is if you have water quality results, which we don't necessarily have, but you do have some test kits that can provide you with a level of disinfectant in the water that's quite easily available. But again, hopefully this will only be the exception and not the rule. And if you are using water from a JoJo tank, can I recommend that you use it for non-potable waters? That means non-drinkable. In other words, if you want to shower, wash your clothes, all of these things, it's very hard to estimate without testing the level of disinfection in the water. But ultimately, if you use the water fast enough from when you're collecting it, it should be fine. But again, without testing, you don't know. To test is to know. I hope that helps.
Okay. So then there was, and it's just, I guess, secondary, but it's in the same regard. So how often must disinfectant be added? But I guess you've already sort of said it shouldn't be for drinking, in fact. So.
If I can just add, when we have water supply systems, it all depends on how much water is being used out of the system. And we would even have points within the discharge system or distribution system, the reservoirs, where we do additional chlorination. So it's very hard to say verbatim what you should be doing. And what we normally do is water modeling, water quality modeling, where we can say where should we have additional chlorination in the system. That's why when you have a JoJo tank, without knowing how fast you are using that effluent, it's very difficult to say. But again, if you can use it, if you have a good water supply system, please, if you can, irrigate your garden with that and not use potable water for something that you don't have to drink. I will please ask you all, use water sparingly, get rainwater tanks, and all of these things. Yeah.
Then another question was, does it help to have a filter prior to water entering the home?
The water that we received from metros especially don't need additional filtering. If you are so inclined, you can add processes, but this is typically for aesthetic reasons. All the water we have in our metros especially do reach the limits that I've shown you. There is, if you go on the Department of Water and Sanitation's website, you'll also be able to see there under, it's called IRIS, I-R-I-S, what the micro compliance is for your area. So obviously you can imagine in the smaller areas it's more challenging, but in the larger metros like ours, I'm sitting in Centurion now, I'm getting water either from Rainwater or City of Tshwane, depending on where you are. If there's no boil alert, or there's no alerts on the news for you not to drink the water, there's no need to add a filter.
Then on sort of a larger, or I guess a higher level, so you referred to the blue drop and green drop programs that are being revived now, and you mentioned that they died out for various reasons. What were those reasons, and how can we prevent that from happening again?
It's obviously in all of these things, It's about leadership. And the challenge with any governmental institution is whenever we have a change of leadership, there's a change of priorities. And what was amazing to see is it was also from the municipality side that they were going, where's the blue drop? Where's the green drop? We want it. We liked it. It was working for us. We did have a challenge regarding funding as well. And we did have a challenge regarding the capacity of the lead inspectors like myself to try and get enough of people all on the ground. Because initially when we did this the first time, I think we were 20 people who were running all around South Africa, visiting plants. And you can imagine from a resource point of view, we were running ourselves ragged, but we loved it. Ultimately, it was such a good news story. We didn't mind doing that, but sustainably, we needed a larger force. We needed more capacity, and the Department of Water and Sanitation needed the resourcing, because, you know, like all good things, once it becomes a success and the ball starts rolling, you need more and more and more input. But ultimately, the good news is, yeah, it's starting again.
And then in addition, in the SONA, the President made mention of accelerating the establishment of a National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency. Now, where does that fit? So obviously it'll be national, but how, you know, who is going to take the responsibility for all of that? And where do you see that sort of, you know, improving what we have already?
Can I come back on this when we see each other again? Because I still, before I can give details, I just obviously need all the right governance structures to be able to give details. But keep in mind that any agency is good news. And yeah, let me get back with more details. It's too recent for me to give details.
Okay. All right, and then this is now the secondary question to the JoJo tank question. If you do have to use water for drinking from a JoJo, would boiling be adequate to make it safe?
In my presentation, I mentioned it needs to be rapid boiling water, but keeping in mind, if I don't know what's in your raw water, it's very hard to assure you of what the final water is going to look like. So for me, I would always just say manage your risks. Even if, you know, the great thing about us as humans and the ingenuity that we have is we can treat any water. So even acid mine drainage water, seawater, all of these things. But I can only prescribe to you the treatment if I know what's in the raw water. So even if I say to you, your boiling's fine, meantime there could have been arsenic in the water or whatever the case may be, and then I'm giving you bad advice. So again, to measure is to know.
Can I ask a question while you're busy? Sorry, I did had to log out. And maybe Michelle already spoke to it, but I would like to, Michelle, I don't know whether you touched on it. How can we as doctors get involved going forward? But after Shelley have asked all her questions.
Okay, no problem. I'll go there.
Okay. Well, this, I guess, is related. It was, you know, so at the moment where a medical practitioner picks up an issue, say they start to see patients with diarrheal disease, where and how, where do we report these kinds of things to, other than the Department of Health structures? We do have reporting structures for diarrheal diseases in place. But obviously that's not necessarily the root cause. So is there, you know, so where would you recommend that these things are escalated to at the moment?
So again, it depends on where you are, in a metro or not a metro. So again, it gets easier if you're in a metro or not. But for example, if you're in a metro, you can call the municipality or metro and they'll actually come and test your water. So if you have a doctor, you've picked up that you're constantly getting the same diarrhea symptom and you're suspecting it's water, you can actually get a municipality or metro to come test your water. Some municipalities obviously might not have those resources, especially if it's rural or very small, in which case I would suggest you actually have the water tested. And there are many laboratories across South Africa that can do that. Again, more prevalent in the metros, but again, they'll be able to give you the results of your water testing and also provide you the comparison to the SANS 241 and make some comments around that as well. I know it's a costly process, not extremely costly, but ultimately if you have many of these markers coming out, it might be worth the cost of doing the water sampling and testing.
Okay. Then sort of related to that, I mean, we just saw the launch of the Human Rights Commission report today on the contamination in the Vaal River system, which we haven't had a chance to look at yet. But the question has to come to mind, why or how did it reach the level of the Human Rights Commission? From the fact that it was a water contamination issue, that it had to reach that level for some kind of redress to be implemented.
So this is obviously a very sensitive issue, and a lot of community members and businesses have been affected. I think once again, it's not an isolated issue in South Africa. It's an issue where historically the operation and maintenance and replacement of aging infrastructure didn't happen at the rate that it possibly could have. And again, the moment you fall back and you're on the back foot when you're trying to keep up with operation and maintenance, and you might not be receiving the rates and taxes that you expect. In the case of Mfuleni, they also have the same issue with Eskom that's not getting the rates paid, had their accounts attached. It's, I think Eskom is sitting in the same boat that not getting paid is making the situation even worse. However, I just want to mention the Minister of Water and Sanitation is currently working very hard, and we are intervening in the Vaal. There's a lot going on which I can't tell more about. We're doing communication, community stakeholder consultation going forward. It's extremely sensitive, and we know historically the people are quite jaded, and it reaching the Human Rights Commission. Ultimately, for me, there are positive plans going forward, and if we can be successful in the Vaal, it will proliferate to other areas of the country as well that might have the same problem.
Okay. And then just to come back to, and Dr. Coetzee, you're welcome to sort of come back to discuss it more now. To Dr. Coetzee's point is, how do we operationalize this to doctors on the grounds that we can actually, help with the response to water quality issues in our own communities?
So you would have remembered in my last slide, I said the plan going forward is to create this identification of hotspots where we can see on the IRIS system of the Water and Sanitation website where there are hotspots and water quality. And we can work together with doctors and members of the community and champions to say, what can we do? Ultimately, when it comes to the Department of Water and Sanitation, we're responsible for bulk water and sanitation. So it's very difficult for us to come into the communities to ensure the proper operation and maintenance. We are working with COGTA, we are working with councillors, but ultimately I think it will take a team effort together with the doctors and awareness programs to say, okay, number one, there's a lot we can do to ensure that the water that reaches us or the wastewater systems remain operational. But there's also a point where we receive potable, drinkable water and might be contaminating it ourselves as well. And to see the value of the fact that so much effort goes into treating water and wastewater, as I showed you, and not to discount that. And this is where I'm going to implore everybody again, please pay your water tariffs, please pay your sanitation tariffs, because during COVID, as you know, a lot of businesses and people cannot afford to pay. And we need that money for operation and maintenance. As you can see, it's intricate. We can't do it without the funding required. And from our side, from Department of Water and Sanitation, from COGTA, we're really trying hard to working on the funding, the capacity, all of these things. But it takes a community or a village to make everything work. So yeah, I think, but between us, you know, what we're trying to do with SALMA now, we'll reach out to the doctors as well of your membership in ways forward on the hotspots, what we can do, and the champions in the local areas.
Shelley, I think what we need to do from SALMA's side is also send out a communique to our members and other non-SALMA members who would like to join this project, where we ask, do you have problems in your area? And would you be willing to become, we don't ask you a lot of work, but, you know, as sort of an oversight and say, listen, but without water, I have now seen quite a lot of diarrhea, and in the community, something is wrong. Salma, Michelle, what now? What is the next step? What do? We don't expect you to know everything because we can't, but just picking up the hotspots, coming back and say, what do we do? And also doctors that are in rural areas, especially in the rural areas where we know there's maybe one borehole for a whole community because of the system that broke down, and everyone is covering up for it. For the doctors to stand up and say, listen, there's a problem in my area. Salma, Michelle, what now? And then for those doctors who doesn't really have a problem, but who are interested into knowing more of this, and maybe at some stage think that I don't want to be sitting in private practice anymore. I would like to maybe become part of another organization where I can look at water quality and with all my knowledge as a medical doctor. So, you know, one needs to look at the opportunities that's there. Maybe just ask our members, are they willing? And then just, even if there's 5 doctors out of this 210 sitting here tonight, willing to raise their hands and to say, let us make a difference. I think, you know, if you start small, it will grow. We do not expect hundreds of doctors to start with this project. But if we have a few and we can share the success stories going forward, I think we can make a difference. I'm always saying, just think, if you open this morning your tap and you want to wash your face and there's nothing coming out, you know you have to go to work. Your hair is not washed. For us as females, my hair is not washed. I haven't washed my face. How can I go to work? How do you think people, especially in the rural areas, deep rural areas, that's how their lives are? And we if we can get involved, that's my plea to members out there, non-members. Let us just get involved, and not expecting you to lose to stop your work every day, but picking up the phone, saying there's something. That's where I would start. I'm not sure. Shelley, Michelle, Dr. Mazukwa.
Absolutely agree, and looking forward to working with you, doctors.
All right. So we've been through all the questions that came up. So I think this is probably a good point to finish off. So Dr. Kutsia, we will certainly follow up with the communique to the members about this project. As we go along, starting very small, because it is sort of a small bunch of resources that we've got at our disposal at the moment. But I think there's really definitely something that can be done from a community perspective in identifying hotspots and making sure that certainly the doctors are involved in identifying those. And it's taking small things that occur in your practice and in your community and turning that into a bigger story, which then resonates in improving water quality across the country. Dr. Mzukwa, I don't know, I think you are supposed to close. I don't know if you have anything else to add this evening.
Before he jumps in, because, you know, we are the females and he's the only male here on this, again, maybe maybe if we can again, ask our members if they are willing, and maybe have a following up webinar just to explain again. There's always people who would like to hear more and more, and Michelle can just give more detail next time.
Absolutely, I would be honored to.
Fantastic. All right. So I think we'll be closing the webinar now. So Michelle, thank you very much. I must admit, and we had sort of spoken before this, and even then I found the presentation very, very interesting from the technical point of view. You knew there was so much involved in water processing. So yeah, I mean, Salma has already sort of committed to engaging with this project, and we will be, working with Michelle and the group with the Global Businesswomen's Forum, and we will be pursuing this in the near future. So thanks everyone for attending. Dr. Kutsia, any final word from you?
No, I'm just waiting for if he's here. Dr. Mazuka, you can unmute yourself. Yes, my friend is here. Thank you. So we give the last word to a man. Normally it's the last word to a female, but we are gracious tonight, Dr. Mazuka. We'll give you the last word.
No, thank you very much, colleagues, to the SAMA Board of Directors present here tonight, the leadership and members of the Circle of Global Business Women present tonight, the excellent presenter, Dr. Michelle Kruger, for this excellent presentation, all SAMA members, all non-SAMA members, and all healthcare workers here present, our Shirley McGee for this moderation, and all SAMA staff who worked really behind the scenes, and also everybody who's watching on our YouTube channel. We wish you a very good week further, and please stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.